Hello, my name is Timmy Vilgiate, the Secretary of the Colorado Springs Mutual Aid and Solidarity Union, and you are listening to the February 25th, 2021 News Roundup, which is our first time trying to do a news roundup, and hopefully not the last time trying to do a news roundup. So, first of all, the first item of news is that the House has passed the Equality Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. It also expands the definition of sex to include gender identity and to allow trans women the protection that should be rightfully afforded to them as women. This has been lambasted by a lot of right-wingers and trans-exclusionary radical feminists, ranging from Marjorie Taylor Greene, who hung up a sign intended to target and harass her neighbor. I believe, let me look at her neighbor's name. I do have a little list of things. Marie Newman, who has a trans daughter. I think that is, in terms of like just being a decent human being, it's kind of a shitty thing to do to bully your neighbor in the House of Representatives. GOP Representative Chip Roy has vowed to, I guess, challenge this in the Supreme Court in some way, and so lots of reactionary, predictable reactionary backlash against this. Locally in Colorado Springs, councilwoman Jill Gaebler has expressed her fervent opposition to the Equality Act, saying that the trans agenda is trying to destroy what it means to be genetic female. Jill Gaebler is a parent TERF, I guess, or something like that. And there is going to be a city council meeting on March 9th. The Mutual Aid and Solidarity Union is encouraging folks to show up to express their opposition to Gaebler's comments. If you'd like to know more about that, you can go on to her Twitter and see. There are a lot of myths about trans women in sports that I wanted to mention. I'll post a link to an ACLU article that talks a little bit more about that and a little bit of other kind of refutations to some of the pseudoscientific things that folks will say about trans women in sports. There is a lot, though, just to kind of summarize, there's a lot of biological differentiation even within genders. And beyond that, there's a lot of complexity to the biological nature of gender that goes beyond just like what genitals a person happens to have. Also beyond that, like for women who have gone through a transition, maybe that are taking hormone supplements, they lose a lot of body mass along the way. They lose a lot of muscle mass. And so they really do undergo a lot of physiological changes that make it unreasonable to expect them to participate in men's sports. But perhaps most importantly, this idea that like trans women should not be allowed to participate in sports, it fits into this kind of like this sexist idea that women are like somehow weak and they need to be protected and they can't possibly compete, with men, or it fits into this idea that they're somehow lesser. And there have been trans people participating in sports for a long time without issue. And so this is, I believe, a needed reform. It does not go nearly far enough in fixing all of the issues that trans people face in general in the United States, but I think it is a necessary reform. So moving forward, just getting into a little bit of national news and a little bit more national news, and then we'll cut to the international news. The Overflow facility on the U.S. border, I believe, merits a little bit of condemnation. It is a facility meant to house up to 700 children aged 13 to 17. It has been rationalized by Biden as a kind of necessary step. It has even been defended by alleged progressive AOC, who, for those of you who I know in U.S. terms she's like considered far left. She's more like, in international sense, like center left kind of reformist politician. kind of drifting to the right, drifting more and more close to the establishment, has defended the Overflow facility after calling for years for the abolition of ICE, calling Trump's use of these border facilities deplorable, and referring to them as concentration camps, which they are. I'd be interested to know. I haven't gotten a chance to look into it, but if I can, I'll also try to bring some reports from the ground in future newscasts to talk about this. Biden has attempted to do some immigration reform. He did put an immigration bill in front of the House. Have not looked at it, but he also did a deportation freeze on his first day in office. That deportation freeze was blocked by Trump-appointed Judge Drew Tipton in what Vox called a contravention of numerous Supreme Court decisions, but they expect that it will likely stand up in the Fifth Circuit of Appeals, which is one of the most conservative appeals courts in the country, and will possibly stand up in the Supreme Court, given the majority of Republican justices or Republican-appointed justices on there. What I would say about that is that recently, like, some justices have shown themselves willing to at least be like more objective than they'd expect. Like, they don't tend to, like, on the Supreme Court necessarily come down in like strict partisan ways. And there's a pretty broad precedent for the executive branch to have prosecutorial discretion, to be able to pause these kinds of like deportations and orders like that end up tearing apart families and communities. It is disheartening, though, that this is the kind of thing that the government is so entrenched on maintaining this persecution of refugees and immigrants on our southern border. Really, like, our entire country depends in a lot of ways on the labor of undocumented migrants. They contribute a lot to our economy and a lot to our social safety nets. They pay a lot of taxes without necessarily qualifying for social benefits, and there have been budget reviews and studies that have shown that they actually contribute more than they take away. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Whenever you hear about these like repressive actions against immigrants, the notion of an immigrant is itself a constructed thing that kind of derives from this mythical idea of a nation state. Like, these nation states are really abstract constructs. They're lines drawn on paper, and really we're all humans. We're all humans, and like, people have been moving across those borders for thousands of years. So I think it's important that not only do we like press for, reforms, that we actively resist the unjust and unfair actions of ICE and the immigration enforcement apparatus in general. And I think that it's important as well that as leftists we do not fall into this trap of thinking that we need to work with the Democratic Party in any way whatsoever, because they are a status quo party. That's what Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is committed to upholding the capitalist status quo. Even like socialist Bernie Sanders says that, like, he doesn't want to get rid of capitalism. So they're all like, all those folks are committed to like maintaining this imperialist capitalist status quo. Moving forward from immigration, I also wanted to kind of call attention to this executive order, because it might not be something that like immediately grabs your attention, but I think that it's worth noting. Biden also put out an order reviewing the supply chain for semiconductors. He had a quote that I thought was very interesting. I think supply chains personally are very interesting, which is another reason I'm highlighting this. So he says, "For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost." So that's referring to the fact that, like, having a small component, like a semiconductor, very small, has thousands of transistors in it. It's very complicated. Having that small component, like a shortage of it or any kind of interruption to the supply, will compromise the manufacturing for a whole host of other machinery. And so he's ordered a 100-day review of the minerals and materials involved in that, looking at policy recommendations to fortify the supply chain. And that is interesting to me because it brings us in contact with a lot of questions about where do those materials to make semiconductors come from? Where do the materials to make electronics come from? And in a lot of cases, the answer to that is from conflict zones in the global south. For instance, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is where a lot of the world's coltan reserves are found. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is kind of where I'll start jumping into my international news overview, has recently had a shift of power, first peaceful transition of power in the country's history from Joseph Kabila to Felix Tshisekedi from the Union for Democracy and Social Progress. He's a social democrat, center-left figure, has promised a lot of reforms, but he's dealing with a lot of challenges. For one, there's a current active Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There's also ongoing violence in eastern Kivu. And a lot of that violence continues to be encouraged by multinational corporations which rely on the supply of minerals from the Democratic Republic of the Congo in order to produce consumer electronics. So that's something worth keeping an eye on. Italy has requested a UN probe, actually, into what recently happened in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Their ambassador and their ambassador's bodyguard was killed in an attack. There have been, though, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the violence that happens there. And the thing that a lot of folks don't necessarily realize, too, about the Democratic Republic of the Congo is it is literally, like, the size of Europe. It's a huge, huge country. And it does not have infrastructure that is designed to maintain like an internal economy. It was designed by the Belgians in order to facilitate export, and it's heavily dependent on like riverine transportation, very spread out. Like Kinshasa is hundreds and hundreds of miles and hours away from East Kivu and the Swahili speaking provinces that are close to the border with Rwanda and the other Great Lakes countries. So worth keeping an eye on. I do not think that like the kind of moderate social democracy policies are necessarily adequate to addressing the kinds of major systemic problems that exist in the Congo, but I also do wish Felix Tshisekedi luck on his endeavors. Another thing that has been in the news a lot recently, but that I also wanted to touch on, is the ongoing anti-coup protests in Myanmar. You have leftist groups, trade unions, and LGBTQ folks standing up to oppose this coup. And the police killed 2 people this weekend. The military has also been apparently encouraging or even working with armed groups and they're not armed with guns, they're armed with, reportedly, according to the AP, slingshots, iron rods, and knives, but pro-military protesters that have been kind of counter-protesting the anti-coup protests. Recently, there was video of military police also going into neighborhoods. There's been a lot of repression. The protesters are currently demanding the release of 600 political prisoners, along with the release of President Aung San Suu Kyi. I hope I said that right. And if I didn't, I'm sorry. I'm like incredibly sorry. I did a report in 8th grade on Myanmar for geography class, and I should know how to pronounce more words. Moving forward, That also brings me to another attempted coup, supposedly, in Armenia. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan generals in Armenia demanded that he resign. This is in connection with a military defeat that Armenia suffered in a conflict with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which is a disputed region that Armenia and Azerbaijan have both claimed sovereignty over. There have been reported flyovers as well of planes. It's not totally clear whether that was a Russian plane or an Armenian plane. But yeah, according to Pashinyan, though, he later, after calling for the mobilization of supporters to help stop what he called a coup, he backpedaled and said that the threat of a coup is largely manageable. It was an emotional reaction, and we should not be strict with our brothers. So I'm curious about what's going on there. It does seem interesting. Apparently, Pashinyan, I kind of looked into like what is his ideology? What are his politics? He's a hardcore centrist, I guess. Not exactly like a ideologue. Just sort of a centrist type figure. I'm curious though if anyone knows more about Armenian politics, if they can tell me more, if I'm like missing something there. And I'm also going to kind of keep an eye on what happens there and update you if anything else changes. In South America, I recently just found on the World Socialist website as well when I was kind of putting this together, the borders are becoming increasingly militarized. So this is something that is worth keeping an eye on. For those of you who don't know, there has been a very significant, not only Venezuelan refugee crisis, which I think most people are aware of the Venezuelan refugee crisis that is still ongoing. 4.6 million displaced Venezuelans have sought refuge in neighboring countries, but also a significant population of Haitian refugees. Brazil has contributed a lot of manpower and military to the pacification of Haiti ever since the aftermath of the earthquake. And there have been a lot of Haitian undocumented migrants in Brazil who tend to be subjected to a lot of legal marginalization and exploitation. There are currently 500 displaced people, mainly from Haiti, that are stranded on the Amazonian border between Peru and Brazil. Very bad place for those of you who have not been to the Amazon to be stranded. They're stranded on the International Friendship Bridge, which is also probably not a very great place to be stranded. I'm just saying this as like having been there, like the humidity, the heat, you don't want to be stranded there, period. The World Socialist website reports that there is an intensification of military buildup on the borders of Colombia and Ecuador, Ecuador and Peru, Peru and Brazil, and Chile and Bolivia. This is being fueled by right-wing presidents like Jair Bolsonaro of Brazil and Colombian President Ivan Duque, his Operation Wall, which was meant to kind of block movement between Colombia and Venezuela. You go down to South America or the Caribbean, really, I've noticed since that ever since like the Venezuela crisis in Venezuela really started to pick up, it is a really big like political topic of discussion there. So in the Guianas, you have a lot of Venezuelan migrants trying to flee there. You have a lot of them trying to flee into Brazil, and in like places like Aruba, which is right off the coast of Venezuela. The government and like the kind of tourist promotion agencies like actively try to keep the prices like really high to discourage Venezuelans from going there, which it's really, to me, it's this kind of like it's what is so toxic about nationalism is this idea that because someone is from another country or because someone lives on the opposite side of an imaginary line, that they have a different status as a human being, that they don't deserve food, water, shelter, so keep it in your mind, keep it in your thoughts. I will try to update you later as far as like the situations with the refugee crisis down there, and also try to update you on more news about what is going on in South America. So that is and then a little bit more Latin American news. and this kind of brings us back into touch with the United States a little bit. Biden also renewed an order prohibiting the movement of U.S. registered vessels into Cuban waters. So this is an order that has been in place for a while, and it is meant to restrict essentially the movement of refugees from Cuba into the United States. And there's a lot of stuff to like talk about with Cuba that I don't necessarily have time to unpack, because they've been the victims of a U.S. imposed embargo, a lot of U.S. imperialism before the Cuban Revolution. They were being heavily exploited by the United States. Their economy and their government had been heavily manipulated. There was a lot of political repression well before the Cuban Revolution. And then when the Cuban Revolution happened, the United States isolated Cuba from the rest of the world. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba has been in an economic kind of slump since then. So Cuba right now, there's been reported, according to the Miami Herald, which I'm like, keep in mind, I'm being a little suspicious of anything that is not, I'm being suspicious of a lot of these like Western news sources whenever they're talking about a communist country in general. But the Miami Herald is reporting a lot of food shortages, there was recently 8 Cuban migrants found after being at sea for 16 days, 2 pregnant women, 6 men. I said that on the story that they were in a styrofoam boat. This is why I think that this executive order renewing this prohibition of U.S. registered vessels is in a way actually exacerbating this humanitarian crisis, because you aren't allowing vessels to go back and forth to let refugees come into the United States. What you end up having is people trying to do it on their own in very unsafe conditions and putting their lives and their families' lives at risk. In Cuba, the government is currently trying to expand the number of sectors where they're going to allow private business. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. I also noticed that from looking at the government website, because when I'm reading Miami Herald, I'm also going to try to read the Cuban government news on this. They are making a lot of progress on their vaccine, on containing COVID. They are still, like everyone else, dealing with that on top of the embargo. So it's very impressive, I think. Their pharmaceutical sector and their medical sector is incredibly impressive. And so they're probably going to be starting to do vaccine distribution if they haven't done it already with their own vaccine. I'm not sure if I do need to check, and I'll keep tabs on that, because I think it's interesting. I know there's problems with Cuba. I don't think any government is perfect. I think governments are terrible. But it is worth keeping an eye on, and frankly, the kind of resistance that Cuba has been able to put up is to me, I find it very inspiring. So solidarity with Cuba. Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, wants to repeal sanctions on Cuba and pass the U.S.-Cuba Trade Act of 2021. This is before the Senate. I'm not sure where it will go, but we will keep up on it. Lastly, in other news of communist countries I feel very nervous about talking about in my Solidarity Union news roundup, Canada and the Dutch Parliament have both declared the Uyghur abuses, China's abuses of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, genocide. And China, in turn, has invited UN observers. China says that this is all like a huge misunderstanding, and they blame it on a far-right anthropologist named Adrian Zanz. And Adrian Zanz is the editor of a website called victimsofcommunism.org, which does not entirely sound like an objective resource. I do think that, I believe the argument that there's definitely propaganda and there's this kind of geopolitical maneuvering against China, but I also can see that there's China's like a state capitalist disaster. It's gone so far from the initial kind of socialist ideology. It's now Xi Jinping kind of like make China great again ideology is essentially just palingenetic ultranationalism. It's essentially fascism. Although, like, I feel a little bit odd saying that, because there's also been, like, and this is kind of like I said, I like look at what their government's saying. I think that they're trying to modernize and trying to improve the people's lives and trying to reduce poverty. But at the same time, they're also trying to enforce this notion of cultural sameness. And they've imprisoned 1 million people. And this is in response to trying to contain terrorism. In a lot of ways, I think that China's kind of high modernist surveillance state is something that we should keep an eye on. And this is a little bit of editorializing, because it's the kind of thing that will come to the United States eventually. Our government is not a great friend of civil liberties when capitalist interests are at stake or threatened in any way. And capitalist interests are going to be heavily threatened in the next few years due to climate change. I'm here in Texas. I was just in class, and all of my friends had no water for 3 days, and we had to like rely, and it was great. They all had to rely on like each other in order to meet their needs. There was a lot of solidarity in the community, but also the government was just shit. Like the state government, like what the leaders were saying was like awful. Ted Cruz went to fucking Cancun. I mean, who am I to talk? I was in Colorado the whole time, doing stuff. But yeah, kind of, and then like, I guess I can kind of talk about what the union did in relation to that, because we did send down like 28 gallons. I drove down with that, dropped it off in Itasca pretty recently. That's south of Dallas a little bit. It's about 120 miles from Austin, which is where I live currently. You might be asking yourself, why does the secretary of the Colorado Springs Mutual Aid and Solidarity Union live in Texas? And I go to school here. My home is Colorado, but I go to school here, and so I drift back and forth. But yeah, and just to summarize, because I know I have had to clear apps from my iPad in order to finish making this video, I will summarize by just kind of summarizing what the Mutual Aid and Solidarity Union has been doing. We are continuing to do homeless outreach, food distributions every Saturday at 12:45, meeting at Dorchester Park. The police have swept a lot of the homeless camps. We are going to try to get back in touch with where folks are, and to try to actually like get in touch with people and hear their stories and hear what effects the police actions actually have on real people, because people have died. Like when we were out there last Saturday, a woman had just frozen to death outside of the Springs rescue mission. There are people too who just think that people are voluntarily sleeping out there in sub-zero weather, and so I think that the city government should be, first of all, ashamed of the way that they treat people. There shouldn't be empty shelter units at all in the Springs, and there shouldn't be these little morality tests to get people into the shelters. But yeah, our union is also working on like some Zine publishing. We're going to be putting some stuff on Etsy soon. We're going to be trying to expand our YouTube channel. This may be our first video on the YouTube channel. And we are going to be having another arts and crafts pop-up in April. If you have any questions about the Mutual Aid Union, I'm happy to answer them in the comments. csmutualaidunion@gmail.com is our email if you'd like to get involved. You may even do your own news broadcast. I'm kind of just doing this because I want to push everyone else to help with the news broadcast and show them what it would look like, but you know, other people can do it too. And we're anarchists, so it's like you can jump in if you want to get involved. You don't have to wait to be like approved to get involved. There's like a little bit of vetting, but like you don't have to like ask for permission to like to do stuff once you've been like vetted. So yeah, and plus it's a really nice group of folks. We we're very welcoming. We're very friendly. We're just a bunch of nice folks, and we hope you join us. With that said, thanks for listening to this news broadcast, and I will see you next time I do a news broadcast, which could be tomorrow, could be next week. I don't know yet.